Hello to the curious and the thoughtful. It's Ellie again. Nice to see you. I'm going to confess, Nancy Pelosi used to be at one point my hero. And the reason for that is because she was a bit like the perfect baseball player. She knew every single play that existed in the Washington playbook, the signals and the timing and the strategy and you name it. But then something happened and it kind of changed my view. And I think, it probably was silly of me. I mean, I really admired her for a woman in her 80s to be as articulate and as savvy and as upright, even on her stiletto heels at that age, is pretty remarkable. And I still admire her for all of those things. She's very, very clever. But back in 2024, she missed the mark. And that's the bit that exposed what's missing for me. So yes, I do still think she's a canny player now that she is getting ready to exit from politics because she has stated that she's not going to run for re-election. I mean, she is, I think, 85 or something. So, it might be time. But what she has done is she's exposed to me something. And that there are two halves to being the right kind of politician in this current moment. And Nancy only has half of that, but not all of it. And now that she's stepping down, it kind of leaves me wondering, what did she leave behind of herself? Did she leave enough to move forward? And who's going to take her place? What is going to take her place in the Democratic Party? And is it going to be enough to build something new and powerful? So let's look at this. Nancy Pelosi is a strategic master. She lines her caucus up very well in advance, so well in advance, in fact, that everything we see as the public is merely a formality of whatever has already been agreed in the smoky room deal that took place weeks prior. But the Democratic Party is filling up with new blood. And these people come from the activist mindset, which is the other half of the equation. Activism is an embodiment of the archetype of emotional movements. So everything in the activism movement is about heart. It's about heart and soul. But the heart and the soul pretty much suck when it comes to the backroom deals because they don't have the grit. They don't have the killer instinct and the strategy that goes with it. And that was the Nancy Pelosi side. But when it comes to that other side, the Pelosi side, that the strategic mastery of somebody like Nancy Pelosi, her method can't survive by itself these days either. The public wants both. They want a hybrid. They want fire, but they also want clarity. They want rebellion, but they also want that ritual that leads to a strategic outcome. It was back in 2024 during the Joe Biden pressure campaign when everybody was putting him under pressure to resign. And it was that phenomenon that actually changed my view on the Democratic Party. Nancy Pelosi and many of the other established traditional Democrats were applying incredible pressure onto Joe to cause him to step down just 3 months before Election Day. And they brought the traditional media with them. So all of the big heavy duty media hosts that you see and influential media personalities piled on the pressure as well. And yes, Joe was a bit old, like we all get old eventually, but he was a bit old. But so were they. In fact, Nancy is 2 years older than Joe Biden. And she had a real nerve of saying that he was too old to run for the presidency, whilst at the same time she was running for another term herself. And don't even get me started on George Clooney because, he had his first kid at 56. So, having your first child at 56 is a bit like being president of the United States at 80. But maybe I'm just being a little bit grumpy about that as well. But my point is not about George Clooney putting pressure on Joe Biden because, George Clooney is an actor and he's welcome to have his opinion, but he's not a real political player. But Nancy Pelosi is a real political player and a very powerful one. And her timing, in my view, that ultimately caused Joe Biden to step down after all of her pressure and the compounding media pressure. We don't know. But there is a possibility that it may have been what ultimately lost the Democrats the election. We don't know. Because leadership isn't about just knowing when to exit. It's about knowing what the people are ready to receive. And the person who replaced Joe Biden when it came to this front-runner candidacy was Kamala Harris. I thought Kamala Harris was amazing, is amazing. Okay, and I think she would have made a fantastic president. But she had very little time to prove herself. And she did an outstanding job during the time that she had, when she was allowed to be herself. However, she had gone from a relative unknown, because as vice president, which is traditionally a background kind of position, that is often, diplomatic in nature and things, and not really out there in front of the public. She went from that VP role to presidential contender, which is all about being out front. It's kind of like a chalk and cheese kind of situation. And she had to contend with the public perceptions of things like race and gender, and also the unfamiliarity that some people had. They didn't have enough time to get to know her. And it takes a while for people to warm up to someone new, especially in politics, where it's very hostile and skeptical and, just is, isn't it? And cynical by nature. And Kamala Harris suddenly appeared as the future president, prospectively. And that felt more like a symbolic thing to many people rather than a strategic possibility. So symbolism is fine, except it's only half of the equation. And Kamala's arrival was messy, it was sudden, and it ended up being resented by enough people that it ultimately failed, regardless of how great she could have been. There were other things too. I mean, she started off exhibiting that genuine fire and passion, but then, the media coined the word joy until it got to the point where they'd taken the joy out of joy and it no longer meant anything anymore. And I think there's also that layer of it as well. But we don't know now, because even though she probably and most certainly could have been an injection of something new and fresh and exciting and maybe even amazing, it didn't ultimately succeed. But what it's done is all of this scenario has presented a kind of a image of a blind spot that the Democrats keep falling over time and time again. They keep choosing between the chess player and the street poet, and those two things are two very different things. What the party needs is they need a hybrid spirit, someone who can play chess but also do the poetry out in the street. They can play to the heart and be that performer, but they can also be in the smoky, dark recesses of gritty Washington making the deals that people don't hear about. All they see is the finished product. It has to be someone who can do both, who represents both sides of that whole. They have the energy and the drive to perform out there and get a visceral response from the people, but they also have the Washington instinct and the political savvy to pull the strings in that smoky room. And so far, in the whole time that I've been following US politics, there's only one person I've seen who might, and I say that, might. They might fit that bill. But they often are rejected for all kinds of different reasons. And that person, I think, might Gavin Newsom. I think he might be the only one so far. I have occasionally mentioned him in the past 5 years, and each time I get kind of mixed responses from people. The people who love the activist kind of street poet type of politician say that he's too smooth and too contrived. And then the people who love the deal makers and the back smoky room kind of character, they say that he's too performative and he's too showy. And of course, he's not going to be perfect. And I'm sure that California, isn't the smoothest oiled up machine that we've ever seen, because, nothing is perfect. But then again, nobody is perfect and nothing is perfect. And it looks as though he might want the job in 2028, because he seems to be stepping outside of the boundaries of California an awful lot for someone who is supposed to be looking at California. So I think he's thinking nationally as well as locally. So it looks as though he might want that job. The most important thing is that we elect people based on how they resonate with us, spiritually speaking. And that is coupled together with how they're likely to deliver on our practical material needs. So it's a mix of spiritual and material resonance. And to win, the Democrats are going to need to have both. They're going to have to find a hybrid that has both of those things. It's not just the policy, it's also the physical presence, the spiritual presence of the politician. Because leadership is a reflection of who we are. And we are a combination of both spiritual and practical, or spiritual and material entities. If we deny one side or the other side, then we're not going to be able to find what's needed to win 2028. And it may even impact 2026. Because when you swing from strategy to activism, with the people that seem to be filling up the Democratic Party but are not actively working together, then what it does is it just takes the party in circles. Instead, it's important to find that perfect hybrid person, because if the party does find that hybrid that has a combination of strategy and activism, deep and natural to their core, they might just change the world. If this episode spoke to you, there's more just like it in this playlist, just waiting to be seen. Welcome to the new world. This is Ellie Dreams Under. I love knowing you're here, and I'll see you in my dreams.